Charles Parker Bowles had always considered himself a fortunate man. At 68, he owned a successful antiquarian book business in the heart of London's Bloomsbury district, lived in a beautiful Georgian townhouse in Belgravia, and had been married to the love of his life for 30 years. Camilla, with her infectious laugh and seemingly endless network of friends, had brought light and social connection into what had previously been a rather solitary existence centered around rare manuscripts and academic conferences. That Tuesday morning in March 2023 began like any other. Charles rose at 7, made tea for 2, and carried a cup up to Camilla, who was already showered and dressed in her riding clothes. She kissed him goodbye, mentioning she was meeting her friend Sarah for their weekly hack through Hyde Park, followed by lunch at their usual spot near Harrods. Charles barely looked up from his newspaper, offering a distracted goodbye as she gathered her riding helmet and left through the front door. The house felt particularly quiet that morning. Charles had grown accustomed to the rhythm of their life together, Camilla's constant stream of phone calls, her animated conversations with friends, the steady flow of social engagements that kept their calendar perpetually full. She had a gift for friendship that he deeply admired, maintaining connections with people from every phase of her life. Former colleagues from her brief career in public relations, school friends from her boarding school days, neighbors from various addresses they'd shared over the decades, and an ever-expanding circle of new acquaintances she seemed to collect wherever she went. Charles spent the morning in his study, cataloging a recent acquisition of 18th-century botanical texts. The work required intense concentration, examining paper quality, binding techniques, and provenance documentation. It was detailed, methodical work that he found deeply satisfying, a stark contrast to Camilla's more spontaneous approach to life. While he could spend hours analyzing the watermarks on a single page, she could strike up a conversation with a stranger at a bus stop and emerge 20 minutes later with a new friendship and plans for dinner. Around 11:30, he heard the unmistakable sound of Camilla's phone ringing upstairs. The ringtone was distinctive, a classical melody she'd chosen because it sounded elegant rather than the standard electronic buzzing most people used. Charles paused in his work, expecting to hear her footsteps overhead, but then remembered she was still out riding. The phone continued to ring persistently. After the 5th or 6th ring, Charles climbed the stairs to their bedroom. Camilla had left her phone charging on her bedside table, something she rarely did. She was typically attached to the device, claiming her extensive social obligations required constant availability. Friends might need last-minute dinner recommendations, someone might cancel plans requiring quick reorganization, or one of her elderly relatives might need assistance. Charles had long since accepted that the phone was an extension of his wife's personality, always buzzing with messages, calls, and notifications from her seemingly inexhaustible list of connections. The phone had stopped ringing by the time he reached the bedroom, but almost immediately began again. Charles glanced at the screen, thinking he might answer if it was urgent. The caller ID simply read M with no surname or additional information. He hesitated, knowing Camilla was particular about her privacy, but the persistent ringing suggested something important. On the 4th ring, Charles answered. "Hello, this is Charles. Camilla's not available right now. May I take a message?" There was a long pause on the other end, followed by what sounded like someone clearing their throat nervously. "Oh," said a man's voice, cultured and refined, with the unmistakable accent of someone who had attended the finest schools. "I was hoping to speak with Camilla directly. It's rather personal." "I'm her husband," Charles replied, slightly puzzled by the caller's obvious discomfort. "If it's urgent, I can try to reach her, though she's out riding at the moment." Another pause, longer this time. "Perhaps I could call back later." "When would be a good time?" "She should be home by 3 this afternoon." "May I ask who's calling?" "Just tell her M called." "She'll know." The line went dead before Charles could respond. He set the phone back on its charging stand, mildly curious but not particularly concerned. Camilla had many friends, some with unusual nicknames or preferred forms of address. There was Bunny, who was actually named Margaret, Cricket, whose real name Charles had never learned, and the Colonel, who had never served in the military but had earned the nickname through his authoritative manner at dinner parties. Charles returned to his study, but found himself distracted. Something about the caller's tone bothered him, not just the nervousness, but a quality he couldn't quite identify. It wasn't the casual familiarity of a close friend, nor the polite distance of an acquaintance. There had been an intimacy in the way the man said Camilla's name, a presumption that she would know immediately who M was without further identification. 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. Charles heard it clearly from his study but assumed Camilla had returned early. When it continued ringing, he climbed the stairs once more. This time, the caller ID showed a different contact, David Tennis. Charles knew several Davids in Camilla's social circle, though he couldn't immediately recall one associated with tennis. Camilla had played occasionally in her younger years but hadn't held a racket in decades. "Hello, Camilla's phone. This is Charles." "Charles." The voice was immediately warm and familiar, though Charles couldn't place it. "How lovely to speak with you. This is David Morrison. I was hoping to catch Camilla before this afternoon's appointment." Charles searched his memory but couldn't recall meeting a David Morrison. "I'm sorry, but Camilla's not here at the moment." "What appointment were you referring to?" There was a slight hesitation. "Oh, perhaps I have the wrong day. We'd arranged to meet about the consultation. But, if she's not available, I'll call back later." "Consultation?" Charles asked, but the line had already gone dead. He stood in the bedroom, staring at Camilla's phone, feeling the first stirrings of unease. 2 calls within half an hour, both from men who seemed to know Camilla well, both cutting short their conversations when they realized they were speaking to her husband. It could be perfectly innocent, perhaps they were discussing surprise arrangements for his upcoming birthday, or planning some kind of social event they wanted to keep secret until details were finalized. But, the way both callers had reacted to his voice suggested something else entirely. There had been surprise, certainly, but also what seemed like embarrassment or even alarm. As if speaking to Charles was not just unexpected, but actively problematic. The phone buzzed with a text message. Charles glanced at the screen and saw it was from Sarah writing. This, at least, made perfect sense. Sarah was Camilla's oldest friend, someone Charles had known for nearly as long as he'd known his wife. They had grown up together in the countryside outside Bath, and their weekly rides were a cherished tradition that had continued even after both women moved to London decades ago. The message was simple: running late. Start without me. See you at the usual place at 1. Charles felt a moment of relief. Here was normal, explainable communication from someone he knew and trusted. Sarah's message confirmed that Camilla was indeed writing, exactly as she'd said she would be. Perhaps he was overreacting to the earlier calls. Camilla's phone was constantly ringing with various social obligations, charity work, and the complex logistics of maintaining friendships across several decades and social circles. He was about to leave the bedroom when the phone chimed again with another text. This one was from M, presumably the same M who had called earlier. Charles hesitated, knowing he shouldn't read Camilla's private messages, but curiosity overcame discretion. The message read, "Need to discuss the situation urgently. Can we meet tomorrow instead of Thursday? The arrangement needs to be finalized before the weekend." Charles stared at the message, trying to parse its meaning. What situation? What arrangement? The language was deliberately vague, as if the sender was being careful not to specify details that might be compromising if read by the wrong person. Which, Charles realized with growing discomfort, was exactly what was happening now. Another message appeared, this time from a contact listed simply as J. The message was even more cryptic, confirming Friday evening as discussed. Same location. Please bring the items we talked about. Charles felt his chest tighten. The messages could have innocent explanations, but, taken together with the morning's phone calls, they painted a picture of a woman leading a far more complex and secretive life than he had imagined. The carefully vague language, the use of initials instead of full names, the references to unspecified arrangements and items, it all suggested a level of discretion that seemed unnecessary for ordinary social or business dealings. He scrolled up through the message history with M and found dozens of exchanges dating back months. The tone was consistently familiar, sometimes affectionate, always careful about specifics. There were references to the usual time, our special place, and the thing we discussed. Most troubling were messages like, "Can't wait to see you again," and "Last time was wonderful, as always." The message thread with J was shorter but equally concerning. References to deliveries, payments, and maintaining discretion appeared regularly. One message from 3 weeks earlier read, "The package was perfect. Client was very pleased. Same arrangement next month?" Charles sank into the bedroom chair, Camilla's phone trembling in his hands. The woman he had loved and trusted for 30 years was clearly involved in something she had never mentioned to him. The messages suggested regular meetings with people he didn't know, business arrangements he was unaware of, and a level of secrecy that felt fundamentally incompatible with the open, honest marriage he thought they shared. His mind raced through possibilities. Could Camilla be involved in some kind of business venture she was keeping secret? Perhaps she was planning a surprise for him and needed to coordinate with various people without his knowledge? Or maybe she had become involved in charity work that required confidentiality for some reason? But, even as he tried to construct innocent explanations, Charles knew he was grasping at straws. The tone of the messages, particularly from M, suggested something far more personal than business arrangements or charitable endeavors. There was an intimacy in the communications that made his stomach turn, a familiarity that spoke of a relationship extending far beyond casual friendship or professional collaboration. The phone buzzed again. Another message from David Tennis appeared. Sorry about the confusion earlier. Your husband seems nice. We should probably be more careful about timing our calls. Charles stared at the message in shock. The implication was clear. David Morrison knew that Charles didn't know about their relationship, whatever it was. The reference to being more careful about timing suggested they had been deliberately arranging their communications for times when Charles wouldn't be around to answer Camilla's phone. He scrolled through David's message history and found months of correspondence about meetings, arrangements, and what appeared to be regular appointments. The messages were professional in tone but personal in frequency, sometimes multiple exchanges per day, always carefully scheduled around specific times and locations. A terrible thought began forming in Charles's mind. The three different contacts M, J, and David all seemed to represent different aspects of Camilla's secret life. The messages suggested she was maintaining multiple relationships or arrangements that she had never mentioned to him, relationships that required careful scheduling, discreet communication, and active concealment from her husband. Charles looked around their bedroom, the room they had shared for decades, filled with photos of their life together, souvenirs from trips they had taken, books they had both enjoyed. Everything looked exactly as it had that morning when he carried Camilla her tea, but now it all felt different. The familiar space suddenly seemed to belong to a stranger, someone who had been living a double life so successfully that her husband of 30 years had never suspected anything was amiss. The phone chimed once more. This time it was from Sarah writing, and the message made Charles's blood run cold. He answered your phone again this morning. We really need to talk about this situation. It's getting harder to cover for you. Charles dropped the phone as if it had burned him. Sarah, his wife's oldest and most trusted friend, the woman he had known and respected for 3 decades, was actively helping Camilla deceive him. The weekly writing sessions, the lunches at Harrods, the casual mentions of their long-standing friendship, it was all a cover story, carefully maintained to provide Camilla with alibis for whatever she was actually doing with her time. He picked up the phone with shaking hands and scrolled through the messages between Camilla and Sarah. What he found made him feel physically sick. Months of coordination about stories, references to keeping Charles in the dark, and detailed planning about how to explain various absences and activities. Sarah wasn't just aware of Camilla's secret life, she was an active participant in maintaining the deception. Charles sat in stunned silence, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he thought he knew about his life. The woman sleeping beside him every night was a stranger. The friends he had welcomed into their home were conspirators. The marriage he had treasured as the cornerstone of his happiness was built on a foundation of lies so extensive and sophisticated that he was only discovering them by accident. And this was just the beginning. Camilla wouldn't be home for hours, giving him time to explore exactly how deep the deception went. As he held her phone, Charles realized that he was about to uncover secrets that would change everything, not just about his marriage, but about the woman he thought he knew better than anyone in the world. Charles spent the next hour methodically examining every aspect of Camilla's phone, discovering layer after layer of deception that made his initial shock seem naive in comparison. What he had first taken for a few inappropriate friendships revealed itself to be an elaborate network of relationships, business dealings, and activities that painted a picture of a woman he had never really known at all. The contact list alone was revelatory. Among the expected entries for family members, neighbors, and mutual friends were dozens of names Charles didn't recognize, many listed only by initials or nicknames. There was the banker, Swiss connection, property guy, and museum lady. Each contact had extensive message histories, some going back years, all carefully maintained separate from the life Camilla shared with her husband. Charles opened the message thread with the banker and found himself reading what appeared to be detailed discussions about offshore accounts, investment opportunities, and fund transfers. Camilla was clearly involved in financial arrangements that were not only hidden from him but seemed designed specifically to avoid detection. Messages referred to untraceable transactions, discreet banking solutions, and maintaining privacy from domestic oversight. One particular exchange from 6 months earlier made Charles's hands shake as he read it. Camilla had written, "Charles has no idea about any of this. He thinks our only accounts are the ones we opened together at Barclays. Need to keep it that way." The banker's response was equally disturbing, complete confidentiality assured. "Your husband will never see any documentation from our end. The Swiss arrangements provide total protection." Charles realized that his wife had been systematically hiding financial assets from him, possibly for years. The implications went far beyond simple secrecy. This suggested tax evasion, money laundering, or other serious financial crimes. More personally devastating was the realization that Camilla had deliberately chosen to exclude him from knowledge of what appeared to be substantial wealth, allowing him to worry about their retirement planning and household expenses while she maintained secret accounts he knew nothing about. The Swiss connection messages were even more explicit. Detailed discussions about numbered accounts, bearer bonds, and cleaning money that had been irregularly obtained. Camilla appeared to be using Swiss banking secrecy laws to hide not just assets but the sources of those assets. References to clients, commissions, and services rendered suggested she was earning money from activities that required international financial concealment. Charles moved to the property guy messages and discovered that Camilla apparently owned real estate he knew nothing about. Properties in Monaco, a flat in New York, and what appeared to be a country house in Scotland were all discussed as if they were routine business matters. Messages about rental income, property management, and tax implications revealed an entire portfolio of assets that had been purchased, maintained, and profited from without Charles's knowledge. One message exchange particularly stung. Property guy had asked about selling the Monaco apartment, and Camilla had responded, "Not yet. Charles still thinks we can barely afford the London house." If he knew about the others, he'd start asking questions about where the money came from. Need to maintain the fiction of our modest circumstances a bit longer. Charles thought about all the times he had suggested they hire a housekeeper or take more expensive vacations, only to have Camilla gently redirect him toward more budget-conscious choices. She had encouraged his belief that they needed to be careful with money, even as she was apparently maintaining multiple luxury properties around the world with income from sources she had never disclosed. The museum lady messages revealed yet another hidden aspect of Camilla's life. She was apparently involved in acquiring and selling artifacts, artworks, and antiques through channels that seemed deliberately obscure. References to provenance issues, discreet sales, and avoiding export documentation suggested she was dealing in items that couldn't withstand legal scrutiny. Charles found detailed discussions about ancient artifacts, Renaissance paintings, and rare manuscripts, his own area of expertise, that Camilla had bought and sold without ever mentioning to him. As someone who had spent his career in legitimate antiquarian book dealing, he immediately recognized the language of the black market art trade. Camilla was dealing in stolen goods, items with questionable ownership, or pieces being sold to avoid inheritance taxes and government seizure. One message made him feel physically ill. The Mesopotamian pieces moved quickly. Buyer didn't ask questions. Profit margin was exceptional. Do we have more items from the same source? Museum lady's response included specific details about artifacts that Charles recognized from news reports about items stolen from Iraqi museums during the war. His wife was trafficking in looted cultural treasures, profiting from the destruction of irreplaceable historical heritage. But it was the personal messages that truly broke Charles's heart. The contact, whose calls had started his morning of discovery, turned out to be someone named Marcus, and their relationship was unmistakably romantic. Months of intimate messages painted a picture of a passionate affair that had been ongoing for at least 2 years, possibly longer. Marcus wrote to Camilla with the familiarity of a long-term lover, "Missing you terribly since Tuesday. When can we have a proper weekend together? The hotel in Bath was perfect last time." Camilla's responses were equally intimate. "Charles thinks I'm visiting my sister next month. We could have 3 whole days together. I can hardly wait." Charles scrolled through months of such exchanges, each message a dagger to his heart. Detailed plans for secret meetings, passionate declarations of love, and casual references to their shared physical intimacy. Camilla had not just been unfaithful, she had been conducting a full-scale romantic relationship, complete with regular getaways, gift exchanges, and future planning that explicitly excluded Charles. Worse still were the discussions about Charles himself. Marcus would ask about Camilla's home life, and she would respond with dismissive comments about her husband's naivety, his boring academic interests, and his failure to satisfy her emotionally or physically. Charles is such a dear man, she had written, but he lives in his books and manuscripts. He has no idea how to make a woman feel truly alive. Another message thread revealed that Camilla and Marcus had been discussing divorce plans. Once I figure out how to protect the assets, she had written, we can start thinking about our future together. Charles will be devastated, of course, but he'll recover. He's too boring to stay hurt for long. Charles realized that while he had been contentedly living what he thought was a happy marriage, his wife had been actively planning to leave him while ensuring he would receive as little as possible from the dissolution. The Swiss accounts, the hidden properties, the offshore investments, they were all part of a strategy to conceal assets before filing for divorce. But Marcus wasn't the only romantic relationship Camilla was maintaining. The J contact turned out to be Jonathan, another regular lover with whom she had been involved for even longer. Their messages went back 3 years, revealing a pattern of regular meetings, expensive gifts, and intimate weekends away. Jonathan appeared to be wealthier than Marcus, and their relationship seemed more focused on luxury experiences and material benefits. The bracelet is exquisite, Camilla had written to Jonathan. Charles complimented it at dinner last night. If only he knew it came from my lover rather than the antique shop I claimed. Jonathan's response revealed the extent of his generosity. Nothing is too good for you, darling. The matching necklace should arrive this week. Tell Charles it's a replica you bought at the museum shop. Charles remembered the bracelet well. He had indeed complimented it, pleased that Camilla had treated herself to something beautiful. She had laughed and said she'd found it at a little shop in Portobello Road, claiming it was probably fake but that she loved it anyway. Now he knew it was genuine expensive jewelry, a gift from one of her lovers, worn in their home while she accepted his praise for her supposed thriftiness. The pattern continued through numerous other contacts. David Tennis wasn't involved in sports at all, but was apparently a high-end escort or companion whom Camilla hired for social events when she needed an attractive, sophisticated man to accompany her to functions Charles couldn't or wouldn't attend. Their messages discussed payment schedules, event requirements, and instructions for maintaining their cover story if anyone asked about their relationship. Richard Investment was facilitating her illegal financial activities, helping her move money through shell companies and offshore accounts. Patricia Travel was booking and coordinating her secret trips, ensuring that all arrangements were made under false names or through accounts that couldn't be traced back to her real identity. Thomas Legal appeared to be providing advice on how to structure her affairs to minimize legal exposure and maximize her ability to claim ignorance if questioned. Each new discovery made Charles feel more foolish and betrayed. The woman he had lived with for 30 years, shared meals with every day, made love to regularly, and trusted completely had been conducting multiple affairs, running illegal businesses, and planning to abandon him while stealing everything they had supposedly built together. But perhaps most painful was discovering how many people in their social circle were aware of Camilla's activities. Messages with various mutual friends revealed that his wife's secret life was an open secret among many of the people he considered friends. Dinner party guests, neighbors, even some of his own professional acquaintances had been covering for Camilla, helping maintain the illusion of their happy marriage while knowing exactly how she was betraying him. Sarah's messages were particularly hurtful because Charles had trusted her almost as much as he trusted Camilla. But their message history revealed she had been actively facilitating the deception for years, providing alibis, covering stories, and even occasionally participating in Camilla's business activities. The latest shipment cleared customs without problems, Sarah had written last month. Your cut is in the usual account. Charles suspects nothing. Charles realized that his wife's oldest friend was actually a business partner in whatever illegal enterprises Camilla was running. Their weekly rides weren't social outings but business meetings, opportunities to coordinate their activities and ensure their stories remained consistent. Every time Charles had welcomed Sarah into their home, shared meals with her, or trusted her judgment about his wife's activities, she had been actively participating in his betrayal. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. Camilla had constructed an entirely parallel life, complete with romantic relationships, business ventures, financial arrangements, and social connections that were all hidden from her husband. She had done it so skillfully that Charles, despite living intimately with her for 3 decades, had never suspected anything was amiss. More disturbing was the realization that this wasn't a recent development. The earliest messages he could find dated back over 4 years, suggesting that Camilla's secret life had been developing for a significant portion of their marriage. This wasn't a sudden betrayal born of midlife crisis or temporary dissatisfaction, it was a long-term, systematic deception that had been carefully planned and meticulously maintained. As Charles sat surrounded by the evidence of his wife's betrayal, he began to understand that everything he thought he knew about their life together was a lie. Every conversation where Camilla had seemed genuinely interested in his work, every intimate moment they had shared, every decision they had made together about their future, all of it had been performed by a woman who was actively planning to leave him while ensuring he would be left with nothing. The phone buzzed with a new message from Marcus, looking forward to this evening. The restaurant I booked is very discreet. Can't wait to discuss our plans for next month. Charles realized with sick certainty that while he sat discovering his wife's betrayal, she was out planning her next romantic encounter, probably already deciding what story she would tell him about where she had been. Charles looked at the clock and realized Camilla would be home in less than 2 hours. He had discovered enough evidence to destroy their marriage, expose her criminal activities, and potentially send her to prison. But he also knew that confronting her immediately would give her the opportunity to destroy evidence, contact her accomplices, and potentially disappear with the hidden assets he had just learned about. For the first time in his adult life, Charles found himself planning deception of his own. He would need to protect himself, gather more evidence, and coordinate with authorities before Camilla realized her secret life had been discovered. The trusting, straightforward man who had woken up that morning was gone forever, replaced by someone who now understood that in marriage, as in war, knowledge was power, and the element of surprise might be the only advantage he had left. Charles spent the remaining time before Camilla's return carefully documenting everything he had discovered. Using his own phone, he photographed the most damaging messages, copied contact information, and made detailed notes about the various accounts, properties, and business arrangements his wife had been hiding. His academic training served him well. He approached the evidence methodically, creating a comprehensive record that would be useful to lawyers, investigators, and perhaps law enforcement. The emotional impact of what he was reading threatened to overwhelm him several times. Messages between Camilla and Marcus discussing their sexual relationship in explicit detail. Financial records showing his wife had been systematically draining their joint accounts to fund her hidden investments. Communications with art dealers about pieces stolen from museums and private collections. Each new discovery felt like another blow to his sense of reality. But it was the casual cruelty in Camilla's messages about their marriage that cut deepest. She regularly mocked Charles to her lovers and associates, describing him as pathetically trusting, intellectually limited, and sexually inadequate. In one particularly painful exchange with Marcus, she had written, "Charles still brings me tea in bed every morning like a devoted servant. If only he knew I was thinking about you the entire time. Sometimes I have to bite my lip to keep from laughing." The systematic nature of her deception was staggering. Charles found evidence that Camilla had been redirecting their mail to ensure he never saw statements from accounts he didn't know existed. She had purchased a separate cell phone for certain communications, using their address but a false name. She had even arranged for certain financial institutions to send correspondence to a post office box Charles knew nothing about. Most disturbing was discovering that Camilla had been drugging him. Messages with someone identified only as the chemist discussed supplying her with sedatives that could be administered without the target's knowledge. "The new formula works perfectly," Camilla had written 3 months earlier. "Charles has been sleeping much more deeply on the nights I need to be out late. He never suspects anything when I return at 3 or 4 in the morning." Charles suddenly understood why he had been experiencing periods of unusually deep sleep over the past year, times when he would fall asleep early and wake up feeling groggy and disoriented. Camilla had been putting sleeping medication in his evening tea on nights when she needed to attend meetings or romantic encounters that would run late. She had been chemically ensuring that her husband would be unconscious and unaware of her activities. The realization that his wife had been poisoning him, even with relatively mild sedatives, added a criminal dimension to her betrayal that went far beyond adultery or financial deception. She had been deliberately altering his consciousness to facilitate her secret life, putting his health at risk for her convenience. As he continued reading, Charles discovered that Camilla's illegal activities were far more extensive than he had initially understood. She was apparently running several different criminal enterprises simultaneously, each requiring different skills and connections. The art trafficking was just one component of what appeared to be a sophisticated international smuggling operation. Messages with various contacts revealed that she was involved in moving stolen artifacts out of conflict zones, laundering money for organized crime groups, and facilitating the sale of illegally obtained luxury goods. Her seemingly innocent social connections provided cover for a network that extended across multiple countries and involved dozens of conspirators. The Syrian pieces arrived safely, she had written to Museum Lady. Buyer was very pleased with the condition despite the difficult extraction. Payment should clear the Geneva account within 48 hours. The casual reference to extraction from Syria suggested Camilla was profiting from antiquities looted during the ongoing conflict, cultural treasures stolen from museums and archaeological sites while the country was being destroyed by war. Another message thread revealed her involvement in what appeared to be human trafficking. References to special cargo, delicate shipments, and clients requiring discretion painted a picture of activities that made Charles feel physically sick. When he found messages discussing young people needing transport and placement with understanding employers, he realized his wife might be involved in modern slavery. The financial scope of her operations was equally staggering. Bank records accessed through her phone showed accounts in Switzerland, Monaco, the Cayman Islands, and Singapore containing millions of pounds. Properties he didn't know about included not just the apartment in Monaco and flat in New York, but entire estates in Scotland, France, and what appeared to be a vineyard in Chile. Camilla had been living the life of a wealthy international criminal while maintaining the facade of a middle-class London housewife. She flew first class to destinations around the world while telling Charles she was visiting her sister in Bath. She owned luxury cars that were registered to shell companies while driving their modest sedan around London. She had jewelry worth hundreds of thousands of pounds stored in safety deposit boxes while wearing costume pieces at home to maintain the illusion of their supposed modest circumstances. Charles found detailed records of her spending that revealed the true scale of her double life. Private jets for transportation to business meetings disguised as social visits. Five-star hotels for romantic weekends with her various lovers. Expensive gifts for associates and clients that cost more than Charles thought their household spent in a year. Designer clothes purchased under false names and stored at addresses he had never heard of. The contrast between her two lives was jarring. At home, she would suggest they needed to budget more carefully for household expenses while simultaneously spending tens of thousands of pounds on a single dinner party for her criminal associates. She would recommend they postpone redecorating their bedroom while purchasing art worth more than their house for her secret apartments. But, perhaps most disturbing was discovering how she had been planning to eliminate him from her life. The divorce planning messages Charles had initially found were just the surface of a more sinister scheme. Communications with someone called the specialist suggested Camilla had been exploring options for permanently removing her husband from the equation. Accidents can be arranged, the specialist had written in response to Camilla's inquiry about alternatives to divorce. Particularly for older gentlemen with solitary lifestyles. Heart attacks, falls downstairs, accidental poisoning, all very believable for someone his age. Camilla's response was chilling: cost isn't an issue. Timing would need to be perfect. I have commitments that require resolution within 6 months. Charles realized that his wife hadn't just been planning to leave him, she had been considering having him murdered to avoid the complications of divorce proceedings that might expose her criminal activities. The woman who kissed him goodbye every morning, who shared his bed every night, who had promised to love him until death did them part, had been pricing assassination services. The sedatives she had been giving him took on a new significance. Perhaps they weren't just to ensure he slept through her late-night activities. Maybe she had been testing his reaction to various substances, preparing for a more permanent solution. The messages with the chemist included discussions about dosage escalation and substances that leave no trace. Charles felt a chill as he realized how close he might have come to becoming another victim of his wife's ruthless pursuit of her criminal ambitions. If he hadn't accidentally answered her phone that morning, if he hadn't discovered her secret communications, he might have simply gone to sleep one evening and never woken up. His death would have been attributed to natural causes, leaving Camilla free to inherit their legitimate assets while retaining her hidden wealth. The timeline suggested she had been planning to implement whatever solution she chose within the next few months. Messages indicated she needed to resolve the domestic situation before a major business deal scheduled for summer. Charles was apparently an obstacle to a criminal enterprise that required her complete freedom of movement and action. As he sat in their bedroom, surrounded by evidence of the most comprehensive betrayal imaginable, Charles heard the sound of Camilla's key in the front door. She was home early, probably to prepare for her evening date with Marcus. In a few moments, she would climb the stairs, kiss him hello, and begin preparing for another night of deception, never knowing that her entire secret life had been exposed. Charles quickly returned her phone to its charging station and walked calmly to his study. He needed to appear completely normal while he figured out how to handle what he had discovered. Going to the police immediately seemed like the obvious choice, but he realized that Camilla's criminal network was sophisticated enough to include law enforcement contacts. Several messages referenced friends at the Met and understanding magistrates who helped ensure certain investigations were handled discreetly. He also needed to protect himself physically. If Camilla discovered that he knew about her activities, particularly her discussions with the specialist about permanently removing him, his life could be in immediate danger. The woman walking through their front door was not just an unfaithful wife or white-collar criminal, she was someone who had seriously considered murdering her husband and had the resources and connections to make it happen. "Charles? I'm home, darling." Camilla's voice carried up the stairs with the same warm, affectionate tone he had heard every day for 30 years. But now he understood it was just another performance by someone who viewed him as an obstacle to be overcome rather than a husband to be loved. "In my study," he called back, amazed that his voice sounded normal. "How was your ride?" "Lovely," she replied, her footsteps climbing toward their bedroom. "Sarah sends her regards. We had the most interesting conversation about property values in Bath. I think we might want to consider investing there when we retire." Even now, even in casual conversation, she was lying to him. Charles knew there had been no ride, no conversation with Sarah about property values. Camilla had spent the day preparing for her evening with Marcus while possibly coordinating with her various criminal associates about their ongoing enterprises. As he heard her moving around their bedroom, probably selecting clothes for her date, Charles began planning his next moves. He would need to contact authorities who weren't compromised by Camilla's corruption network. He would need to secure his own safety while gathering additional evidence. And he would need to do it all while maintaining the pretense that he remained the naive, trusting husband who had no idea his wife was a dangerous criminal who had been planning his murder. The man who had woken up that morning believing he lived a quiet, happy life with a woman he loved was gone forever. In his place sat someone who understood that survival required becoming as calculating and deceptive as the enemy sleeping in his bed. Charles was about to begin the most important performance of his life, one where a single mistake could cost him everything, including his life. Charles maintained his routine with extraordinary effort that evening, greeting Camilla normally when she came to kiss him hello, complimenting her dress when she appeared ready for what she claimed was a charity committee dinner, and wishing her a pleasant evening when she left at 7:30 to meet Marcus at their discreet restaurant. Every interaction required him to suppress his knowledge of her betrayal while appearing genuinely caring and unsuspecting. The moment her taxi disappeared down the street, Charles began implementing a plan he had been developing throughout the afternoon. He couldn't simply call the police. Camilla's messages had made clear that her criminal network included law enforcement contacts who might warn her if a routine investigation was opened. He needed allies who operated outside the systems she had potentially compromised. His first call was to his solicitor, Jeffrey Hartwell, whom he had known since university and trusted completely. Jeffrey specialized in white-collar crime and had connections throughout the legal system that would be invaluable in building a case against Camilla while protecting Charles's interests. "Charles, how nice to hear from you. Is everything well?" Jeffrey's warm voice carried genuine concern when he heard the tension in his old friend's tone. "Jeffrey, I need your help urgently, and I need absolute confidentiality. Something's happened that changes everything about my marriage and possibly puts my life in danger." There was a pause as Jeffrey processed the seriousness of Charles's tone. "Of course. Do you want to meet tonight? I can be at your house within an hour." "Not the house. Camilla might return unexpectedly, and I can't risk her knowing we've spoken. Can you meet me at the British Library? I'm going there now to use their secure computers and copy some documents." They arranged to meet at 9:30 in the library's reading room, where their conversation would appear to be a casual encounter between old friends researching in the archives. Jeffrey agreed to bring his laptop and encrypted communication equipment, understanding without being told that they were dealing with something that required extraordinary security measures. Charles's second call was to his nephew James, a cybersecurity expert who worked for a private investigation firm specializing in financial crimes. James had served in military intelligence before entering private practice, and Charles knew he had experience dealing with sophisticated criminal operations. "Uncle Charles? This is unexpected. What's going on? James, I need your professional help with something extremely sensitive. How quickly can you come to London if I tell you it involves international money laundering, art trafficking, and, possibly murder? James's tone shifted immediately from social to professional. I can be there tomorrow morning. Do you need immediate protection? I don't think so, but the situation is more serious than anything I've ever dealt with. Can you bring equipment to analyze electronic devices and recover deleted data? Absolutely. I'll also bring backup communications gear and some basic surveillance detection equipment. Uncle Charles, are you safe tonight? I think so, but I'll be staying at the Langham Hotel rather than going home. I'll text you the room number once I check in. Charles's third call was to the one person in law enforcement he was certain couldn't be compromised by Camilla's network, Detective Inspector Sarah Morrison at Scotland Yard's art crime team. He had worked with her 5 years earlier when his shop had been approached by someone trying to sell stolen manuscripts, and he knew her reputation for absolute integrity was beyond question. Inspector Morrison? This is Charles Parker Bowles. I helped you with the Cambridge manuscript case several years ago. Mr. Parker Bowles, of course I remember. That case led to the conviction of an entire trafficking ring. What can I do for you? Inspector, I have evidence of a major art trafficking operation that involves stolen artifacts from conflict zones, international money laundering, and, possibly, human trafficking. The situation is complicated because it involves my wife, and I have reason to believe the criminal network includes police contacts. There was a sharp intake of breath. Mr. Parker Bowles, this is extremely serious. Can you meet me tomorrow to discuss this properly? I'll want to bring colleagues from our financial crimes unit and, possibly, international liaison. Yes, but we'll need to be very careful about operational security. My wife may have contacts throughout the system, and I have evidence suggesting my own life could be in danger if she discovers what I know. Inspector Morrison's voice took on the crisp efficiency Charles remembered from their previous collaboration. Understood. I'll arrange a secure meeting location and bring officers I personally vouch for. Can you maintain your normal routine until then? I think so. I'll be staying at a hotel tonight, but my wife expects me to be home when she returns. I'll need to balance maintaining her trust with ensuring my safety. After ending the call, Charles gathered the documents and photographs he had prepared, along with a small bag of personal items, and took a taxi to the British Library. The familiar environment of books and scholarly research provided some comfort as he waited for Geoffrey, though he couldn't focus on any actual reading. Every few minutes, he checked his phone for messages from Camilla, maintaining the pretense of a worried husband wondering when his wife would return from her charity meeting. Geoffrey arrived precisely on time, carrying what appeared to be academic research materials but which Charles suspected included sophisticated electronic equipment. They found a quiet corner where their conversation wouldn't be overheard, and Charles began explaining what he had discovered that morning. Geoffrey's expression grew increasingly grave as Charles described the evidence of financial crimes, art trafficking, and the discussions about murdering him. As a criminal solicitor, Geoffrey had dealt with many shocking cases, but the systematic nature of Camilla's deception and the scope of her criminal activities clearly disturbed him. Charles, this is extraordinary. The financial evidence alone suggests crimes that could result in decades of prison time. The trafficking charges would be even more serious. And the communications about harming you constitute conspiracy to commit murder. What's our first priority? Charles asked. I want her stopped and prosecuted, but I also need to protect myself and recover whatever assets I can from this mess. Geoffrey opened his laptop and began taking detailed notes. Immediate priorities are your safety, preserving evidence, and protecting any legitimate assets from seizure when the criminal investigation begins. We'll need to work closely with law enforcement, but we also need to ensure your rights are protected throughout the process. They spent 2 hours going through every piece of evidence Charles had gathered, with Geoffrey asking detailed questions about dates, amounts, and the identities of various contacts mentioned in the messages. He was particularly interested in the banking information and property records, understanding that financial evidence would be crucial for both criminal prosecution and civil asset recovery. The Swiss accounts present interesting opportunities, Geoffrey explained. If we can prove the funds were derived from criminal activity, we can petition for their return under international asset recovery protocols. The properties might be more complicated, but we should be able to claim them if they were purchased with stolen money or money that should have been part of your marital assets. They also discussed immediate security concerns. Jeffrey recommended that Charles hire private protection while the investigation developed, and that he vary his routines to make it difficult for anyone to predict his movements. Most importantly, he needed to maintain the pretense of normalcy with Camilla while ensuring he was never alone with her in circumstances where she could harm him. "The sedatives she's been giving you are particularly concerning," Jeffrey noted. "We need to have your blood tested immediately to document what substances are in your system. That evidence could be crucial for both criminal prosecution and to demonstrate the immediate threat you're facing." They arranged for Charles to meet with a private doctor the following morning for comprehensive blood and urine testing, followed by his meeting with Inspector Morrison and the Scotland Yard team. Jeffrey would spend the night analyzing the financial evidence and preparing legal strategies for both the criminal and civil aspects of the case. "One more thing, Charles," Jeffrey said as they prepared to leave the library. "You need to decide how much longer you can maintain the pretense with Camilla. Every day you stay in that house increases your risk, but leaving suddenly might trigger her to destroy evidence or disappear with the hidden assets." Charles had been struggling with the same question all day. "I think I can manage a few more days if I'm careful. She's not suspicious yet, and I need time to ensure we have enough evidence to guarantee conviction. If she realizes what's happening and flees to a non-extradition country, we might never see justice." "Agreed, but we need daily communication and immediate extraction procedures if the situation becomes dangerous. I'm arranging for a security team to maintain discreet surveillance starting tomorrow." Charles took a taxi to the Langham Hotel, checking in under a false name Jeffrey had provided. The room was comfortable and secure, but he found himself unable to sleep despite his exhaustion. Every few minutes, he checked his phone for messages from Camilla, knowing she would expect some communication from a loving husband, wondering when she would return home. At 11:30, he sent her a text, "Hope the committee meeting went well. I'm reading late in the study. Don't wake me when you get in. Love you." Her response came quickly, "Wonderful evening. Committee is planning exciting fundraising events for next year. Just leaving now. See you in the morning. Love you too." Charles stared at the message, knowing that every word was a lie. She hadn't been at a committee meeting but was probably just finishing her romantic evening with Marcus. The exciting fundraising events were likely criminal enterprises requiring coordination and planning. Even her expression of love was just another deception from someone who had been planning his murder. But the message also confirmed that his performance was successful. Camilla had no suspicion that her secret life had been discovered. She expected to return home to find her unsuspecting husband asleep in their bed, never knowing that he was actually in a hotel room planning her arrest and prosecution. Charles finally fell asleep around 2 in the morning, but woke frequently with anxiety about the coming day. He would need to return home early enough to maintain his routine, acting normally when Camilla woke up, probably listening to her invented stories about the previous evening while knowing every detail was fabricated. More challenging would be the following evening, when she was scheduled to meet with someone called the specialist to finalize arrangements for what the messages suggested was his planned murder. Charles knew that within the next few days, his wife would likely make her final decision about whether to divorce him or have him killed, and she would base the choice partly on her assessment of whether he suspected anything about her activities. His life might literally depend on his ability to convince a woman who had been deceiving him for years that he remained as trusting and naive as she believed him to be. But now Charles understood the stakes, and he was prepared to play the role of the innocent husband while working with law enforcement to ensure that Camilla's criminal career ended in prison rather than with his murder. As dawn approached, Charles prepared for what might be the most dangerous day of his life, knowing that any mistake in his performance could trigger events that would put him in immediate mortal danger from the woman who had shared his bed for 30 years. Charles returned home at 6:30 the following morning, slipping quietly through the front door and into his study, arranging books and papers to suggest he had spent the night reading. When Camilla woke at 7:15, she found him exactly where his text message had suggested he would be, dozing in his chair with an open manuscript across his lap. "Poor darling, you've been up all night again," she said, kissing his forehead with what seemed like genuine affection. "You worked too hard." Charles managed a sleepy smile, marveling at how easily she maintained the loving wife performance even as she was actively planning his death. "The Holinshed Chronicles are fascinating, but you're right. I should have gone to bed properly." "I'll make us breakfast," Camilla offered, heading toward the kitchen. "You shower and I'll tell you about the committee meeting. We're planning a wonderful auction for next spring. As Charles showered, he wondered if Camilla might use this opportunity to add sedatives to his morning tea. He had arranged with Jeffrey to have his blood tested later that morning, but he couldn't risk ingesting anything else that might affect the results. When she called him to breakfast, he claimed he was running late for an appointment at the British Library and only had time for toast and coffee, which he could monitor while she prepared it. "What's so urgent at the library?" she asked, and Charles detected the slightest edge to her casual tone. "A colleague from Oxford is visiting today to examine some 15th century binding techniques. We're collaborating on a paper for the Bibliographical Society." The lie came easily, supported by enough technical detail to sound authentic. Camilla nodded, apparently satisfied, but Charles noticed she was watching him more carefully than usual. Perhaps she was wondering why he seemed less trusting of the tea she offered, or why he was suddenly had appointments she hadn't known about. He would need to be even more careful about maintaining normal patterns while conducting his investigation. At 9:30, Charles met with Dr. Patricia Henderson, the private physician Jeffrey had recommended. She took comprehensive blood and urine samples for testing, along with hair samples that could reveal drug exposure over a longer period. Dr. Henderson was experienced in forensic medicine and understood the importance of maintaining chain of custody for evidence that might be used in criminal proceedings. "The preliminary screening should be complete by this afternoon," she explained. "If we find evidence of sedatives or other substances, we can do more detailed analysis to identify specific compounds and approximate dosages. This will be crucial evidence if your wife has been drugging you." At 11 o'clock, Charles met Inspector Morrison and her team in a secure conference room at Scotland Yard. She had brought Detective Chief Inspector Andrew Mills from Financial Crime Command and Detective Sergeant Rachel Park from the International Liaison Unit, along with a technical specialist who could analyze the electronic evidence Charles had gathered. Inspector Morrison introduced her colleagues and explained their expertise. "DCI Mills will focus on the banking and money laundering evidence. DS Park will coordinate with international partners regarding the art trafficking and human trafficking allegations. I'll oversee the overall investigation and ensure we maintain operational security given your concerns about law enforcement contacts within the criminal network." Charles spent 3 hours going through every piece of evidence with the team, watching their expressions grow increasingly serious as the scope of Camilla's criminal activities became clear. The financial specialist confirmed that the Swiss banking arrangements showed clear signs of sophisticated money laundering operations, while the art trafficking evidence suggested connections to known international smuggling rings. "Mr. Parker Bowles, this is one of the most comprehensive criminal enterprises we've encountered," DCI Mills explained. "The evidence suggests your wife has been operating as a major hub in a network that spans multiple continents and involves dozens of serious crimes." DS Park was particularly interested in the human trafficking evidence. "These references to special cargo and placement services fit patterns we've seen with organized groups moving people from conflict zones. If she's involved in modern slavery, the sentences would be significantly longer than for the financial crimes alone." Most disturbing was Inspector Morrison's analysis of the communications with the specialist. Scotland Yard's database contains several individuals who matched the profile of someone offering murder-for-hire services, and the language used in the messages was consistent with known assassination brokers. "Mr. Parker Bowles, I cannot emphasize strongly enough how dangerous your situation has become," Inspector Morrison said gravely. "These communications suggest your wife has moved beyond planning to active preparation for having you killed. We need to consider immediate protective custody." Charles had been expecting this recommendation, but he had also been thinking about the implications. "Inspector, if I disappear suddenly, Camilla will know her activities have been discovered. She'll destroy evidence, contact her associates to warn them, and possibly flee to a country without extradition treaties. We might lose the opportunity to arrest the entire network." The team exchanged glances, recognizing the validity of Charles's concerns while clearly uncomfortable with the risk to his life. DCI Mills spoke first. "The evidence you've provided is substantial, but building cases against international criminal networks requires time and coordination with multiple agencies. If we move too quickly, we might only catch your wife while allowing more dangerous criminals to escape." DS Park nodded agreement. The human trafficking aspect alone involves potential victims in several countries. If the network scatters before we can coordinate with international partners, those people might never be rescued. They spent another hour developing a strategy that balanced Charles's safety with the need to build comprehensive cases against the entire criminal enterprise. The plan required Charles to maintain his normal routine for several more days while Scotland Yard implemented surveillance, coordinated with international partners, and prepared for simultaneous arrests across multiple jurisdictions. "We'll have undercover officers monitoring your house around the clock," Inspector Morrison explained. "You'll carry a panic button that will bring immediate response, and we'll have tracking devices in your car and personal items. But you'll need to continue acting normally with your wife, which means significant personal risk." Charles understood the stakes. "How long do we need?" 4 to 6 days to coordinate properly, DCI Mills answered. "We need time for Swiss authorities to freeze the accounts, for our colleagues in Monaco and New York to secure the properties, and for international partners to identify and locate the other network members." They also discussed Charles's immediate safety that evening. Camilla was scheduled to meet with the specialist, and the outcome of that meeting might determine how quickly she planned to implement whatever solution she chose. Charles would need to be especially careful about anything she offered him to eat or drink, and he would need to monitor her behavior for signs that a decision had been made. "We'll have surveillance teams watching both of you," Inspector Morrison assured him. "If she meets with someone we've identified as a potential assassin, we'll know immediately. But, Mr. Parker Bowles, if you sense any immediate danger, use the panic button without hesitation. Your life is more important than any criminal investigation." Charles returned home at 3 o'clock to find Camilla arranging flowers in the front room, humming quietly while she worked. She seemed genuinely happy, which Charles now realized probably meant her criminal activities were proceeding successfully. The woman who appeared to be contentedly maintaining their home was actually running criminal enterprises that destroyed lives and cultural heritage around the world. "How was the library?" she asked, looking up with a bright smile. "Productive. Jeffrey and I made good progress on the binding analysis." Charles had decided to incorporate his real activities into cover stories wherever possible, making it easier to maintain consistency if questioned later. "Lovely. I've invited Sarah and her husband for dinner tomorrow night. I thought we could try that new Indian restaurant you mentioned, or I could cook." The casual mention of Sarah stung, knowing that she was one of Camilla's criminal associates rather than the family friend Charles had believed her to be for 30 years. But he maintained his pleasant expression while agreeing that the Indian restaurant would be perfect. That evening, Camilla claimed she was attending a book club meeting, and Charles played his role perfectly, asking about the current selection and wishing her an enjoyable discussion. As soon as she left, his phone buzzed with updates from the surveillance team. Subject proceeding to Claridge's hotel. Meeting unidentified male, approximately 55, well-dressed, possibly Eastern European accent based on conversation overheard by hotel staff. Charles spent the evening reading in his study, genuinely this time, while receiving periodic updates about Camilla's activities. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours, with their conversation too quiet for electronic surveillance to capture details, but the duration suggested serious planning rather than a casual consultation. At 11:15, he received the final update, subject departing hotel. Unknown male remained behind. Subject appears agitated, checking phone frequently during taxi ride home. Charles quickly prepared for bed, ensuring he appeared to be sleeping when Camilla returned. He heard her enter the house around midnight, but, instead of coming upstairs immediately, she spent nearly 20 minutes moving around the ground floor. Through the slightly open bedroom door, he could hear her making phone calls, her voice too low to understand the words but with an urgent tone he had never heard before. When she finally came to bed, Camilla seemed restless, tossing and turning in a way that was unusual for her. Charles lay perfectly still, feigning deep sleep while analyzing what her agitation might mean. Had she made a final decision about his fate? Was she coordinating with associates about timing for whatever they had planned? Or had something gone wrong with the criminal operations that were requiring immediate attention? The next morning brought partial answers. While Camilla showered, Charles quickly checked her phone and found several new messages that made his blood run cold. The specialist had sent detailed instructions about timing, methods, and cleanup procedures. The plan was elegant and terrifying. Charles would suffer an apparent heart attack during his sleep within the next week, caused by an untraceable compound that would be administered through his regular evening tea. Timing is flexible within the window, the specialist had written. Substance takes effect within 6 to 8 hours, symptoms consistent with natural cardiac event. No forensic evidence, no suspicion. Payment upon confirmation of successful completion. Camilla's response had been equally chilling, understood. Will implement Tuesday evening. Charles has no suspicion and maintains his routine perfectly. Payment arrangements confirmed through the usual channels. Charles realized that he had less than 4 days to live unless the police operation succeeded. Tuesday was only 3 days away, and Camilla had apparently decided that divorce was too complicated given her criminal exposure. She would murder her husband to protect her secrets and inherit his legitimate assets while retaining her hidden wealth. But even more disturbing was a message thread indicating that Charles wasn't her only target. Communications with various associates suggested that Camilla was planning to eliminate several people who might pose threats to her network. Sarah was mentioned as someone who knows too much and is becoming unreliable. Marcus was described as developing inconvenient emotional attachments that needed to be managed permanently. Charles understood that he had discovered not just his wife's criminal activities, but evidence that she was planning a series of murders to protect her empire. Sarah, who had been helping Camilla deceive him for years, apparently didn't realize that her usefulness was ending and her knowledge made her a liability. Marcus, who thought he was planning a future with his lover, had no idea that Camilla viewed their relationship as another problem requiring a lethal solution. As Charles prepared to face another day of performance while his wife planned his murder, he realized that the stakes had grown beyond his personal survival. Multiple lives depended on Scotland Yard's ability to coordinate arrests before Tuesday evening, when Camilla would serve him his final cup of poison tea and begin eliminating everyone who threatened her criminal enterprise. The investigation was no longer just about justice for her past crimes, it had become a race against time to prevent a series of murders that would begin with her husband and expand to include anyone unfortunate enough to know too much about the secrets that had destroyed their marriage and threatened to destroy many more lives before Camilla's killing spree was complete.